How's everybody doing tonight? It's good to be back. Happy Sunday, everyone. I hope everyone had a happy, fulfilled Sunday. It's good to be back with you guys. I've been away for a little bit. Hopefully my audio is okay. Alright. I was at a bachelor party for a friend. It was a LAN party. It was pretty fun. Played COD. And I've been looking for jobs. That's kind of what I've been up to. So I hope you guys have been good. Hopefully, maybe school started for a lot of you guys. It's been alright. The job search is going. You know, it's hard though. It's hard when you don't know Spanish and you live in California. So I know that's probably going to be a determining factor. And also, just with the economy right now, not a lot of people are shopping. Not a lot of people have extra spending money. So things are a little bit slow around here. But hey, keep praying for me. Hopefully I'll find something. Next week, my father is really trying to push me to find something, and so he's restricting my Wi-Fi access to, I think it's like he said, like 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. or something like that. So next week Sunday, I guess the show will be at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or something. I don't know. I am so exhausted with the whole process. I'll have to keep you guys updated on that. So yeah, I have been punished looking for jobs. Yeah, no Pablo, no Pablo Espanol, no Pablo. Sorry, yeah, this is America. I don't have time to learn that. But yeah, let me know if you guys have like a if you were looking for a roommate. Just kidding. Just kidding. So okay, tonight we're talking about Christology, which is this, like the science, the study of Christianity. Christ, why be Christian? Why am I a Christian? So I'll be presenting some arguments against certain other faiths and why I chose to become a Christian. And while I think you can dispute a lot of the premises that I'm going to bring up, I think that they are reasonable, I think they're coherent, and I think they're the most reasonable in comparison to any other religion. As well as I think that that in terms of like the number of miracles that Christianity has to boast for, and other of those, and the number of like spiritual experiences, you could say, attending mass and things, all of those three combined with the philosophical and historical side gives Christianity, I think, a edge here. And I'm going to be using a lot of more inductive arguments, so not so much a priori tonight, but hopefully you'll enjoy it. I'm a little bit tired, like I said, so hopefully I'll stay focused, talk, coherently here. He loves elephants, Suspenos. God loves elephants. All right. And so last time, we talked about the existence of God. We showed why there has to be some first, I guess you can not say a first cause. That's more like the Kalam cosmological argument, which is a good one, by the way. I think it stands. But when we were talking about was Leibniz cosmological argument, which says that there has to be something that is absolutely necessary in order to ground all contingent reality. And we talked about some of the attributes of God and being immaterial, immutable, eternal. And so now it's about, we have to ask ourselves, okay, what is the correct religion then? That seems to be the next step. And we had on Monday a debate between a pagan and a Catholic, and hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I'm actually trying to set up another one. I found a guy who's very intelligent, and he's going to be talking about like arguments for the resurrection, historical arguments. Tonight I'm talking mainly about philosophy. I'll talk a little about the history of it, but mainly about philosophy. But he said that he's willing to argue for the historical details of the resurrection against the pagan guy. The pagan guy expressed some interest in arguing against it, so that's something to look forward to. He said he wants to get some time to prepare, so I'm going to allow him to do that. I have to still talk to the pagan guy as well to make sure he'd be interested in it, but that should be an interesting conversation. So with that, I'll just like jump right in here. What did you say? Oh, thank you guys for the donos. Thank you. Sorry, I apologize. Yes, thank you, Rem, for the ice cream. Thank you, Orange. Appreciate it, guys. Sorry, my apologies. I was not paying attention. Thank you for that. I do appreciate that. Appreciate guys' generous contributions. I was actually able to finally like cash all of that out. Finally. So that's very generous of you guys donating in the past. So appreciate that. So let's just jump right into it. So I guess the first thing we have to tackle here. I'm sorry, my camera's here. Let me make it smaller. All right, there we go. I want to make sure you guys can still like see most of these arguments here. Is the argument against deism. I made this actually right before the show, so forgive me if there's any spelling errors or I know there's going to be a lot of text, so forgive that, but I thought it'd better to have some presentation rather than nothing. More dynamic background, more interesting background. Let's just jump right into it, guys. So the premise one of this argument against deism, of course, is this belief that there is a God. I think we've already established that, but he is disinterested from interacting with the creation, that he set everything in motion, and then he kind of just steps back, kind of just watches from a distance. So why should we reject that? And so premise one, this is an argument, by the way, by Peter Kreeft. It was, I think, first presented by Thomas Aquinas. I think C.S. Lewis did some work with it. And this is Peter Kreeft's version here. So premise one, every natural innate desire in us corresponds to some real object that can satisfy that desire. And of course, the most common examples is there is a desire for, we have a sexual impulse, and there's sexual intercourse that corresponds to that. We have hunger, there's food that corresponds to that. We have thirst, and there's water that corresponds to that. And premise 2 states, but there exists in us a desire which nothing in time, nothing on earth, no creature can satisfy. We have a desire to know or experience, I guess you could say, the transcendental. And that is to say that now that we know that God exists, we want to know more about him, what he's like. And I think that even people who don't even have these very like sophisticated arguments for the existence of God, just intuitively and innately have a desire to, I guess, connect with that spiritual side of themselves. And I think the best evidence of this you can look for is a comparative study of world religions. You can read Vola or Rene Goudon, and then we look at the pagan guy. He was actually very interested in perennial traditions. But every different tribe, every group of people is always held to some spiritual conceptions. They've always believed that there's something beyond the material, and they've always been very interested in trying to either experience that or to know it through knowledge or cognition. And so it seems that, and this is premise 3, and that comes from Aristotle, that nature does nothing in vain. This is a mantra that Aristotle used a lot and is derived from the concept of teleology. That is to say that everything has a proper function, that nothing is done arbitrarily. And this, you could probably deduce this from the principle of sufficient reason. We talked about that last time. Everything has a sufficient explanation for why it is the case. And with all these premises, it seems that we can conclude then that there must exist something more than time, earth, and creatures which can satisfy this desire, that being, of course, God, and of course the desire being to know God, to experience God, to want to connect with Him further. And so that's why it seems to me that Deism, which tries to make God cold, impersonal, try to detach Him from the world of experience, it seems very an unreasonable hypothesis given our desire to know God. And if God is a just God and He gave us this desire, then it seems that He would want to fulfill that. Other arguments that I've heard against Deism include that if God is rational and He made us rational, then it seems that it would be unreasonable to assume that He would have no interest interacting with us, trying to reveal Himself to us, trying to appeal to our reason, our faculties of reason. And in fact, if there is a true religion, then it should be able to appeal to our reasoning skills, since God is, of course, the ultimate creator of all reason, and He is, of course, the one who sets into place all order and structure in the universe, which is the foundation of reason. So that's another one I've heard against arguments for Deism. And of course, if you're a classical theist, and then you believe in what's called divine conservation, I think it's divine conservatism rather, and basically it's the concept that God is maintaining the universe at all times, that there is this potentiality for things in existence, like this headphones, to just pop right out of existence. That's a potential. It's logically possible for it to just disappear, and so there has to be God maintaining its existence in reality. And it comes from the Aristotelian argument for the existence of God. I didn't really talk about it. I'm not really going to get into it a whole lot. But if you already believe in that classical theistic framework, then God is already interacting with the universe. He's already maintaining the universe. Essence itself is being sustained in, I guess you could say, is given this inertia to continue existing from God Himself at all times and all places. And so it makes sense that this would mean that He would also probably be deeply involved with creation at both at this metaphysical level and also a personal level as well. So those are kind of the 3 arguments I've heard given against Deism. And of course, we have so much examples from history of purported incidents of divine intervention that it seems it's very difficult for me to conceptualize this concept that God would just be very impersonal with the world. Yes, C.S. Lewis is awesome. I love C.S. Lewis. We'll get into him, I think, a little bit later, too. His take on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That's a great book series. It has one of the best, I guess you could say, an illustration for the model of atonement. So then, okay, what does this mean? So, against Deism here. So, against, if we're talking about, the traditional characteristics of God, we kind of already mentioned those. We gave a great exposition the last time. If you didn't watch the last episode, definitely go back, watch that one. It's on YouTube. And again, those are He's immaterial. He's eternal. He's all-powerful. He is outside the contingent world. And so this already automatically, ipso facto, precludes pantheistic religions, including Hinduism. In most of its forms, it's going to be pantheistic. I know that the versions of paganism that the guy last time was presenting, a lot of those are pantheistic in nature. They definitely have a strong emphasis on nature and want to worship nature. He said there's a lot of debate within pagan communities about this, that, and the other. It really just sounds to me like a LARP, not gonna lie, because in any case, paganism is dead, so Doesn't seem to me it's even like something I really need to refute. But in any case, pantheism in general definitely is going to contradict, the nature of God. And of course, the pantheistic religion will not be able to interact with us the same way a personal God with reason is going to be able to. And so again, that's kind of like the argument against deism, and also the argument against pantheism. Now, another argument that I have found very interesting is Kant's argument for the existence of the soul. I see that my camera is in the way. I'm sorry. It's just gonna have to deal with that, but that's okay. I think you'll kind of get what I'm trying to get at with this. Last time I made these arguments, I lost your guys' attention. So hopefully I can keep your attention here. Just try to ask questions if you have any concerns, doubts, etc. So here's Kant's argument for the existence of the soul. It's based on a practical reason. It's saying that it's a presupposition before we can have any moral, normative philosophy. Is we have to suppose the existence of the soul. It basically starts off with premise 1 saying the goodwill, which is the summum bonum. And that's not exactly what Kant means by the summum bonum. I kind of simplified it just to make it easier. What Kant means by the summum bonum, it is the combination of living virtuously and that being in harmony with nature. As I say, if you're doing good, that you're being rewarded for those good, your good deeds by nature aligning with your desires. So you are basically happy. And if you're doing bad deeds, then you're being punished. That's what Kant calls the summum bonum. The summum bonum is Latin for the highest good. However, that is very controversial. There's that's kind of an assumption that a lot of people would very much question, and I don't think it's necessary for this argument. So, as far as I'm concerned, we just need to establish that there is what's called Kant calls the goodwill, which is a desire to live as one ought to, as to say, to know what is right as far as one can know, and to do what is right as far as one can do. And so this is obviously the necessary object of one's will, determinable by the moral law, as dictated by nature when she placed reason over the will. And so in the beginning of Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, Kant actually presents this, I think, in the Critique of Practical Reason, but it was in Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals that Kant talks about the goodwill and how if our duty or if our task in life was simply happiness, or if our task in life was simply survival, then instinct is more than sufficient. And in fact, our reasoning capacities get in the way sometimes of survival or happiness, and it can be a detriment. And so he thinks that instead, that the function of our reasoning must be that there must be some goodwill that we ought to choose. If we are given choices, then there must be some choice that we ought to choose that that would align us with right reasoning, basically. And so that is what Kant means kind of here by the goodwill. And so this is something that nature's already, directed us in that, oriented towards us, given us as our theological end. Obviously, since we believe in God, we also believe that basically I'm kind of giving a naturalistic explanation here. But if you believe in God, of course, then God has given us the moral law that we ought to obey. And so, of course, achieving the summum bonum must be possible, since it is contained in the command to approach the latter. In other words, ought implies can. This is a very, this is kind of like a mantra that is often thrown out in philosophy, that if you ought to do something, then it is implicitly guaranteed that it is possible to achieve this. Now, due to the imperfections and chaos of the world, it is impossible for one's will to perfectly conform to the moral law with one's physical existence. That is to say that we'll never be perfect in this lifetime. Our will, that is to say how we desire to live, will never be one in which it is in perfect conformity with the goodwill, the will that nature has set out for us to achieve. And that is simply because I think anyone knows that we are, and of course we're made imperfectly, and there's also imperfections in the natural world that would lead to certain, I guess you could say, conflicts or contradictions and duties. Sometimes you'll have duties that will compel you in two opposite directions. And this is just kind of the result of living in an imperfect world. So this assumption, again, is going to appeal more inductively, and you're going to have to just think for yourself, okay, am I perfect? No. Do we live in an imperfect world? Yes, obviously. And yet, nevertheless, it is required as morally necessary, and so therefore it can only be found in infinite progression towards the perfect accordance, which is and ought to be the real object of our will. Again, we have to strive to, of course, be perfect, to be in complete conformity with the good will. And therefore, this is like the conclusion that Kant comes up with. This infinite progress is only possible on the supposition of an infinite duration of the existence and personality of the same rational being, which must be called the immortality of the soul. In other words, that our rationality continues beyond our physical existence. And this is this is a proof again from practical reason, meaning that it is a supposition that we must believe in insofar as it is a component of our day-to-day living. This isn't so much an argument for the existence of the soul from like metaphysical premises. If you're interested in that, I know that Ed Fazer has done a lot of work on the immateriality of the mind. I think it was his book on scholastic essays. He has a lot of those. If you're interested in more the metaphysical side of things, you want to know like how this is possible from a like classical theistic or themistic perspective, there's a lot there. Honestly, the work right now being done on the immateriality of the mind is quite extensive. People from like John Searle to even what is that one guy? Frege, Gottlob Frege. Even Gottlob Frege was saying that things like language and meaning are not going to be able to be reduced down into something like logic. That there has to be some aspect of it that is beyond the material senses. So that would be something interesting to check out. If you're interested in the metaphysical side, I'm more interested in the practical moral side of things. And it's just kind of like where I specialize in. Let me see what you guys are talking about right now. Ram says Kant's soul definition could just be said in genetic. Okay, no, nothing. Please don't. No genetics. We're not talking about genetics here. Oh my gosh, this guy with his genetics. We're talking about philosophy. Philosophy is presupposed for genetics, so I don't care what you have to say about genetics right now. And Kant addresses the supposition that we are being driven towards survival or happiness and groundwork for the metaphysics and morals. If you're interested in why Kant thinks that, it isn't enough to say that the reason why we can think before we act, because that's what we mean by when he says reason is placed with the will. Kant gives basically this argument that and you should go back and I can probably, maybe I'll do a show on this, but basically it gives the argument that that we employ certain ends to achieve, we employ certain means to achieve certain ends, but these are the ones that we choose. And so if these ends were just for our own happiness, then nature would have done a better job through instinct. And we see that throughout the animal kingdom, is that instinct does a much more better job than we are. In fact, we are we can wage war, we can we do things that are oftentimes very destructive and things that are going to be against the natural end and the things that will make us very unhappy. And if you already believe in God, then you already believe in things that are immaterial as well. So if you believe in God, then you believe in something that has no first cause, it's spontaneous, it is free, and you also believe in something that's immaterial, so it's not in any way a metaphysical stretch to say that therefore we can have souls as well. So now talking, okay, if we do have a soul, if there is an immaterial aspect to our mind, in other words, a lot of our conscious processes cannot just be reduced down to computational skills, then this would probably exclude some more major religions. Religions in which there is no abiding self. Religions like Confucianism, Taoism, these are very, I guess I would even say they're kind of impersonal and they're more like philosophies and like role ethics than they are religions. So those would probably be excluded. Religions with reincarnation, believe that individuals basically ultimately disappear. It's basically like the idea that you're just a water drop and it's being absorbed back into the ocean. That's kind of like the analogy they like to give. And so there's absolutely no abiding self in Buddhism. It's just like our spirit returns to nature. It's the natural cycle of life. While Hinduism it does have an abiding self, that is to say that there's something that we have that continues on in like animals like cows, but we'd stripped of anything that it would like differentiate our nature that gives us our sense of identity, and instead it's just like this core of what they call like the pure God, and because again they're pantheists, so they think God is in everything. And so that's why they're worship cows, is because they think that the part of God that was in their ancestors is now in the cow or something of that nature. So of course all these religions are now going to be excluded. And so now we've kind of reached the point where we have a God, and he demonstrates certain traits, characteristics. They're going to be very in line with, I guess you could say, the three monotheistic religions, the three major ones, and also the concept of the soul. It's going to be in line with Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And I feel like we can just cross out Judaism, get rid of Judaism. It's ethnocentric. I wouldn't even be able to convert to Judaism. Like, there's this Jewish guy at the bachelor party I was at, and I asked him, like, I was like, so what does like goyim mean? I was like, doesn't that mean like for cattle? Because I was talking about the Talmud. I was being respectful. I was being nice. He was this Orthodox Jew, and he went to the same high school Ben Shapiro went to, and I asked him, like, oh, what do you think of the Talmud? Like, all right, what do you think about the part of the Talmud where they call us like the goyim, the Gentiles, the goyim? Doesn't that mean like for cattle? And he said, no. That just means that you're part of the nation. Now, you're not part of the tribe. We're part of the tribe. I was like, oh, yeah, you guys are the chosen, right? He's like, yeah, we're the chosen. I was like, yes, there it is, yes, the in-group preference, very strong. He was talking to me about his all his relatives had been in the same, like, what was it, the same, like, trade. They'd all done the same thing. It was, like, gem work or something like that. Yeah, very much have this, like, collectivist mindset. Any case, the reason why, and then, of course, something like Islam is going to be a later creation after Christianity, and Islam has a lot of confusing doctrines, and so I didn't really get into that, but when I was drawn to Christianity, the reason why I decided to choose Christianity over those two, the biggest reason, was because of its role of what Christianity calls grace, and I found Christology to be extremely intelligible. That is to say, everything kind of works together. It's very coherent. There's a system of theology. And I guess this again goes to Kant. He says, like, his argument, and this is a very long one, forgive that. There's a lot of words on the screen here. So yeah, I know in like presentation classes they say don't do things like this, but I figured I had to so you guys can follow along a little better. And this is his soteriological predicament of our innate evil. Soteriological is basically this concept of theology. So let's get into this here, and basically it's going to explain kind of like the what they call in like Christianity are like after the fall we have the sin nature, we have this innate evil, and this kind of like an argument to, I wouldn't even say to prove it, but so much to just like to discuss it, to kind of like form the concepts of what this entails. To some extent, it is a proof of like, there's a word, it's slipping my mind right now. The stereotypes are always true, very true, Svenos. It's interesting how it works like that, right? Well, he was a very nice guy. There's a word though, it's like the, maybe someone can help me with it. The fall of Adam and innate evil. Anyway, I think you guys know what I'm trying to get at though. And there's another like theological like concept that they use to describe it, but it slipped my mind. Forgive that. So premise 1 says, if I have performed an immoral act, then I have an immoral character. Makes sense. And that basically means I have a general maxim that places inclination above the will. And so, of course, sometimes we have inclinations that are going to be at war with our reason, with the capacity to reason. Our reason is going to want us to move us towards autonomy, to move us towards the moral law. And that is, of course, is the end of our reason, the function of our reason. But our natural inclinations can often, sometimes they're in harmony with reason, other times they're at war with reason, and when we choose to do something immoral, that means we have placed these inclinations that go to war with reason above the will. So this is like our general maxim, that is to say our general disposition, which means that I have a corrupt moral character, which means that I am equivalently to the, that I'm morally equivalent to the worst criminal. And this might sound surprising, like, what? How am I equivalent to the worst criminal? It's because you both share the same corrupt disposition. Your disposition is inherently one that is oriented against that which is good. As to say that your disposition places inclination. It sees inclination as more important. And I think this isn't me, like, trying to condemn anyone. This goes to all of us. I think we place inclination oftentimes above the moral law. That is, again, my character, or your general maxim. By maxim, I mean like a personal policy of the will. Is that of the worst criminal. And then the argument continues saying, if I am morally equivalent to the worst criminal, then it would be better that if I had never been born. I am infinitely guilty of violating the moral law, and therefore I infinitely deserve the infinite judgment and punishment of God for this. I've infinitely transgressed against the law by having this general maxim that is inherently disoriented, and therefore I am infinitely worthy of judgment. In other words, it would do better than if I wasn't even born. If I have a corrupt moral character, then there is nothing I myself can do to remove my corruption. That is, to improve my character, so that I am no longer morally equivalent to the worst criminal. That this is like our predicament that we are stuck in, basically, is that we are always choosing in every, I guess, our general maxim that is like displayed throughout our life is always choosing inclination over reason. And this isn't like something that we always see is true, but it's one that we see to the extent that we know that we are basically broken. And the way, and a good example, and this was one that was presented to me in this book I'm going to read soon to you, some passages from it. But in the book, they basically describe like a computer that is like its task is to perform certain computations, mathematical computations or certain arithmetic computations. And even if it gets the answer right, some of the time, even most of the time, if it gets it wrong, like even a few times, then it is the case that there is something fundamentally flawed with this machine. There's something that is fundamentally not right about this computer, and therefore it's useless because you don't know when it's going to be right or know when it's going to be wrong. Without, of course, another computer which we know is right. And so if we all are like this, then we are basically fundamentally corrupted. And so Premise 5 says, if I have a corrupt moral character and I am corrupted myself, then I do not deserve to have any being, including God, remove my corruption and give me what like Christians call like a new birth. And so the conclusion follows that if I'm unable to do anything myself and I do not deserve the help of anyone else to bring it about, that was unworthy. This is kind of like a I'm not actually the one who wrote this argument, but this is kind of a oddly worded sentence, so let me say this again. I am unable to do anything myself, and I do not deserve the help of anyone else to bring it about that it was worthwhile for me to have been born. This is the very radical evil of the human will, an evil that lies at the very root of our morally legislative disposition, then that corrupts us fundamentally. At its core, again, our general disposition is going to be disoriented. It makes us useless, and it's not something that like we can just correct because it's something that has already been like, according to Christians, it's something that it almost seems like necessary, something that from the fall of Adam that we've just inherited. I think there's some debate amongst the Eastern Catholics with that conception, so I'm not going to take a stance there, but certainly it does seem to just like, again, these are inductive arguments that we are fundamentally going to be disoriented like a computer is, that there's going to be something in the algorithm that is messed up. And so now this is of course a very pessimistic reality. This is something that's not going to inspire a lot of optimism in people. This is something that's going to make people very despondent, very depressed. And so what is the way to escape moral despair? Certainly it seems that God, who wills all to be good, righteous people, God who is all perfect, would want, of course, this to be of us. We have, of course, that duty nature has placed that upon us, as we just mentioned. So what is the way to escape moral despair and rationally resume our self-striving? And the only way is to acknowledge the need for divine grace. So again, this is like an argument for a practical reason. It is assumed that there has to be some divine grace in order to give us the hope to keep striving to live moral lives. And of course, the moral grace and the need for a moral redemption, and which comes from the transcendent source, which is all good and all perfect. And so the only way for our bad computers that are have this messed up algorithm is if we can compare it to a computer that we know does work, and so that we can fix our algorithm. And the only computer like that is, of course, God. He is all perfect, all benevolent. We had talked about kind of why that would be the case last time. And so this requires us to rededicate ourselves to upright willing. We cannot look only to God, of course, though we can't just suspect that God will do all the work. That would be spiritually lazy. There has to be some room, of course, for our autonomy. And so this would defeat, of course, the need for free will. So we must cooperate, in a sense, with the infused grace. God has given each and every one of us, according to the Catholic Church, this infused grace that we have to cooperate with. And then when we cooperate with it, we say that we give it access to our life, that we work with it. The relationship between grace and works is going to be that's very complex. Well, I'll probably do another show about that, salvation process, things like that nature. But of course, this is just something that just seems reasonable and intuitive, that we do have this balance here between we do have to have the need for God's grace, and also we do have to have some moral autonomy. So we have to cooperate with the infused grace that God has given us. We must allow it to, I guess you could say, animate our moral life. As I say, when we perform good works, it is God's grace working in us and through us, and that our change of disposition, we can say, is due to the grace of God. But at the same time, we have to, at every moment, continually striving to do what is right, to continually strive to cooperate God's grace. We can't just sit back and think, oh, well, I'll be, God will just do all the work and I'll be, a better person tomorrow. No, you have to have the mindset that you're going to keep doing the right thing. And then when you look back and see all the good things that you have done, you can credit God as well. And say, oh, this was the work of the, in fact, this is kind of like the role of of course, the crucifixion. This is the role of, and we'll get into like what I mean by that there, but this is the role, like the I guess you could say the effect of the Christ in our life, sanctification, the process of sanctification. So there's a lot of concepts I'm throwing at you here, and of course, we also can have like confidence, and this is something Kant also talks about. He calls it like the Paraclete, which is the Holy Spirit. And he says that has a very significant role in practical reason, and it is the one who supplies a confidence that God, who began a good work in us, will see it to completion. That's a Bible verse. I think it's somewhere in one of Paul's letters. And so basically we can have this reasonable hope that once we have kind of turned ourselves away, we have a penitent attitude, and we know that God will give us his grace, that we can have an upright disposition, and we can remain constant in this disposition. And this is what, of course, like I said, the Holy Spirit has the power to give us that confidence, that hope. However, we also have to accept the penitent suffering we undergo during our conversion. This is something Kant also talked about. And this is in his, what book was this? I think this is in his essay, Religion within the bounds of bare reason. It's not one that I endorse all the ideas, but this is one of the interesting ideas that Kant talks about that I do think is, it was definitely a motivating factor bringing me back to the Christian faith, that we have to accept this penitential suffering we want to go during our conversion, so that we can leave behind the old, the morally corrupt self. In other words, again, faith and the works are required for salvation. We have to suffer along with Christ. We have to remain diligent to turn away from our old self. We have to, of course, be the ones who say, like, and if when it comes to Catholic Church, you have to go to confession, be baptized, perform the sacraments, have a true disposition of contrition when you sin, things of this nature, so that we can turn away from our corrupt self and turn ourselves towards God, who is all perfect, all holy, all powerful. So now, how does Jesus come into this picture here? And that is the question. So we have this concept that we are, morally corrupt. We need God's grace. And so then, how does Jesus come in here? And so this comes in, I guess you could say, in a few ways. It's been us. We can't expect God to do all the work. Yes, that is true. Though I think the way you are meaning that in that statement there, and the meme phrase, it's probably going a little different than the way I'm talking about it tonight. I'm not sure if I endorse the way you're using that. In fact, well, if you're using it in the Fed Post way, definitely not. But I agree in this context. Yes, we can't expect God to do all the work in our lives. Yes. So why Christ, right? So like we were talking about, your need for grace. So how does Christ fit into this? And again, this is why I think Christianity is the most coherent religion, is because we do have this need for grace, and then there is this answer to that, and that is Christ. So I'm going to be reading a short passage here from Kant in the New Philosophy of Religion. Let's see, who did this chapter? And this is basically this chapter here. It's a collection of essays. And in this chapter, there's a Ronald M. Green. He did a great job with this. Basically, it's a collection of essays. In one of these essays, there's a conversation, a back and forth between an imaginary one, of course, Kierkegaard who was a Christian existentialist, the first. Excuse me. I've been like going back and forth trying to battle the hiccups that are inside me. But he was an existentialist, the father of existentialism. He was a Christian. And so basically this is kind of like the last, like, I guess, straw that made me decide, okay, I should probably become a Christian, was the way Kierkegaard kind of revealed the significance of the historical faith and why it was important. And so the first part of this is it provides for us a negative model, Christ does. And so this is how he words it here. And this is not actually Kierkegaard talking, but rather they've taken the words of Kierkegaard, which are at times cryptic, and kind of turned them into how he would be talking kind of modern day style. He's saying here, and he is talking, of course, in this conversation with Kant. I'm not going to go to the context, but basically says, because Kant wasn't an Orthodox Christian. He says, first, because you misconceive the nature of our Savior Jesus Christ. You ignore the teaching that he is fully God and fully man. In his human nature, he entirely enters into our trials and temptations, and he never draws on his divinity in the struggle towards goodness. Have you forgotten his prayers in Gethsemane? His agony of doubt and abandonment on the cross? Yet despite this, he never succumbs to sin, never relinquishes his holy mission. Christ for us is fully a model, never beyond what lies within our reach as human beings, and yet he is, in a sense, a negative model as well. And Kant says, a negative model? Do you mean that we should not imitate him? Kierkegaard replies, no, just the opposite. We should and must imitate him. We must imitate Christ, and the fact that Christ is, someone who experienced temptation means that we can relate to him. We know that he experienced the same things we did, the battle of inclination over reason. However, we also know he's all God, which means that he conquered this. He necessarily had to. It wasn't like it just like, oh, maybe he conquered it. We know he had to have, because he was all God as well as all man. So he's all man, so we know that it's like possible for us to become good like Christ is. And yet he's all God, so we know that he's the only one who's going to become good, or the one who is going to have that perfect disposition. And the Kierkegaard explains it like this way. He says, we should and must imitate him, but we do not. Hence, Christ highlights our sin and deepens our remorse over our culpability for the abandonment of God's holy ways. Kant answers, how intriguing. I confess I never saw things this way, but it's certainly a morally commendable idea. Kierkegaard replies, more than commendable. I would say it is necessary for any moral life that seeks completion. Without this demanding, holy example to sharpen the requirement, we succumb to excuses and sink into the very moral lassitude you denounce. This is why I maintain throughout my work that a Christian ethic is truer to morality than any merely autonomously conceived moral law. And so again, the idea here is that Christ provides us a negative example, that he reveals to us the absolute state of our depravity. I think oftentimes we'll get through life thinking that, hey, we're a pretty good person, I don't kill people, I don't commit, murder or theft or arson or, all these like capital punishments or capital crimes rather. So I think, I'm not a terrible person. I'm doing all right. But once we compare ourselves to Christ, who was all like, he was, you could say, the prototype of the archetype. God is the archetype of all goodness, and he was kind of the prototype example of this on earth. Once we compare ourselves to Christ, we realize how just fallen we are. It reminds us of our corrupt self. It really reinstates this. And so then we're at this point of complete deprivation, and we know that we have to rely entirely on the grace of God. We need his grace. We can't do this on our own. Just our own willpower alone is not going to be sufficient. And so that is why Christ's example is absolutely necessary. So that's part of the reason why there does have to be a revealed faith, and that's why Christ's examples, being all God and all man on earth, as this like prototype, as this negative model, makes sense. It is intelligible. And now the other way, and this is, I think, I just blew my, maybe this is like, kind of a Reddit moment, but I thought this was like, it kind of blew my mind when I didn't really think about it this way. But the fact that the crucifixion was this public event, the fact that Jesus was, this was a very clear historical incident, it gives us a real hope for salvation. It gives us a hope that an explanation of how this grace is going to be won for us. And of course, that explanation is the crucifixion, like I mentioned. And so here, Kierkegaard is going to be reading from a passage that Kant actually wrote. And Kant doesn't actually agree with this. And so Kant just wrote this down as an argument. And Kierkegaard basically says, I do agree with this. And then he argues back and forth with Kant about why. And this is the passage. It says, quote, "To believe that God, by an act of kindness, will in some unknown way fill what is lacking toward justification, is to assume gratuitously a cause that will satisfy the need we feel. It is to commit a petitio principii, which is to say, it is begging the question. If we simply believe that God is just going to, in some unknown and abstract way, fill what is lacking, which is to say, we need the God's grace, then we are, like he says, assuming gratuitously a cause that will need to satisfy the need we feel. For when we expect something by the grace of a superior, we cannot assume that we must get it as a matter of course. We can expect it only if it was actually promised to us. This is something that's very interesting. Again, that this concept of the superior, we can't just expect him to give us something. We can't just assume that we'll get it as a matter of course, but it must be something that's actually promised to us. So it seems that we can hope for the supplement and assume that which is of course grace, that is the supplement, and assume that we should get it only insofar as it actually has been actually pledged through divine revelation. Kierkegaard says this seems to me to be a powerful argument. Kant and Kierkegaard go back and forth about why Kant disagrees. Kierkegaard has the upper hand. You can, what is his name here? The name of this book is Kant, Kierkegaard, The Need for Historical Faith, if you're interested in reading the whole thing. Then Kierkegaard has this brilliant response that I think just summarizes everything. And this response is like, it's kind of like this inflection point in my life. This is when I kind of decided that Christianity had a really intelligible, significant stance that came just from philosophy. This wasn't even just from the historicity of the resurrection or that type of thing, but just from philosophy. It made sense that there does have to be historical faith. Kierkegaard writes, "But I must say that this is the only place where such uncertainty may be inappropriate. Recall that our morally committed person who has come to see the depths of his or her sin does not face a problem of false confidence and assurance, but just the opposite." So again, if we just assume that God's going to bring us grace, then we're going to have a disposition of false confidence and this false assurance. But rather, we should have the opposite. We should be in a paralyzing state, or rather, we will be in the opposite, a paralyzing state of self-condemnation, in which every boy, excuse me, the buoy, no, there's the buoy, I think that's how you say it, and the ocean it floats. The buoying effect must be rejected as merely another expression of self-deception. So again, we are in this paralyzing state of self-condemnation, and so every this buoying reflection must be rejected. It's just an example of self-deception. We'd just be deceiving ourselves if we just assume that God is going to do this as just a matter of course. Here it seems to me that strong medicine is needed. Since nothing is morally or cognitively wrong with perceiving the gospel record as a sign of God's love for us, we are fully warranted in making the events of Christ's holy life, death, and resurrection the conceptual starting point for our moral rebirth. Acceptance to these beliefs is merely another expression of your own insistence on the priority of practical reason and an extension of your willingness to accept noumenal beliefs that do not violate theoretical reason. This is very Kantian. I'm not going to go into what this means, but on grounds provided by compelling convictions of our practical reason. Again, basically, Kierkegaard is just arguing this is an argument for practical reason, not one for metaphysics. In this case, practical needs triumphs over not only the ordinary cautions of theoretical reason, such as not easily admitting belief in a God-man, that you cannot condemn such a belief, but also moral reason in its reluctance to qualify moral autonomy in this way. And so here he's making it very clear that the disposition we have to have is going to be one where we are going to be, you're not going to be presumptuous, right? And there's another part where he adds that. I guess I didn't save that one. because there's another good line where he says basically that to assume that we will be given this grace is just like a matter of course, that there isn't going to be like some specific process or it's not going to be promised to us in any specific way, is to be presumptuous, and that's the opposite of the disposition we're supposed to have. Like, disposition should be one of contrition, humility, not one of expectation. There's a great, I thought I had saved it, but maybe not. Again, this is a great article here. Yeah, I definitely thought I had saved it, but maybe not. If I find it, I'll let you guys know. Maybe it's this one here. Let me see here. First, it is a question of whether we need real evidence and experience in order to build a commitment to moral renewal. That is, this is Kierkegaard writing here, that is, must our moral rededication be accompanied by certain theoretical, empirically warranted beliefs to ground the confidence that we are anything other than morally doomed? To this question, I must give a strong affirmative answer. Everything both you and I have said, but the totality of moral despair, leads me to believe that without some warrant, beyond the voice of conscience, we must end in the paralysis of self-condemning moral despair. I might add here that your own writing repeatedly reaffirm the need for some rationally based confidence, a reasonable hope, and at least the possibility of assistance of our moral renewal. Which is kind of what I was getting at there. So that's a good line there. I guess the context in which Kierkegaard was writing was to the Hegelians, which is very interesting. Maybe it's, is this it? I don't know. I can't find it. That's weird. I thought I had saved it too. Alright, that's okay. Basically what he was saying, it was presumptuous and contrary to how we ought to, the disposition we ought to have. Buoy. I don't know why I can't say that word. That is bothering me. It's like an autism thing. I gotta look that one up. Gotta make sure I know how to say this. Forgive me for not knowing how to pronounce it.
Buoy.
Buoy. Okay. I should have did a pronunciation check before I went live. But in any case, we're doing something. It's a little informal tonight, I guess you could say. All right, so we're talking about, I guess, then the gospel. So then, of course, the gospel is going to rely on the resurrection, right? So what is this historically revealed faith? It is, like I mentioned, the gospel, Jesus' death and resurrection. And so the gospel story has a dual impact. And now I'm transitioning from philosophy to theology. The book I got this from is going to be St. Athanasius on the Incarnation. It's probably one of the best books you can get by one of the earlier church. I don't think he was a church fathers, so to speak, but he was definitely one of the earlier church bishops. He lived during the 3rd century, during the Arian heresy. And when the Arian heresy, in fact, took over the entire West, it took over most of Christendom, the Roman Empire, and he was hunted. Athanasius was. He was living in exile. That's why I don't think it was his motto, but it was often attributed to him that is Athanasius contra mundi, Athanasius against the world, that he was the only one who's speaking the truth in a world of darkness. So if you guys think things are bad now, I mean, imagine how bad it was for Athanasius. He was really literally running for his life. He was excommunicated by, I think it was Pope, was it Linus or Julius? One of those ones. And so, yeah, he was in a lot of trouble. And the church was in a lot of trouble. It has been taken over. But he remained true and faithful to the Orthodox teachings. And he wrote them all down. And so he basically says that the gospel story has this dual impact. Jesus' death, because again, Jesus was both flesh and he was the Word. The Word being all God, the flesh being man, was the consummation of all our spiritual deaths, is the way that Athanasius talks about it. But at the same time, his resurrection, because again, he was the Word, he was God, so he was going to live on, he was going to rise again, it was the abolition of death, it was the defeat of death. And so then as the gospel. I think Saint Paul. Yeah, Saint Paul said like, "Where, O death, is thy victory? Where, O grave, is thy sting?" That when Jesus resurrected, he defeated the concept of like spiritual death, but at the same time also physical death, because we can live again with Christ in heaven. And so our once corruptible self is now can become incorruptible. And basically, there's different ways to explain like the theory of atonement. There's two leading hypotheses right now. One is called Christus Victor. That is the one that Athanasius believes in. And the other one is called the substitutionary, penal substitutionary atonement. This is the one that Anselm and Aquinas talked about. I'm actually a big proponent of the Christus Victor, and basically what that one means is that since the fall of Adam, humanity has been kind of enslaved to Satan, is the way that they word it. I would say that you're kind of just enslaved to, vice, to sin, and so in order to atone for this, Christ became the sacrifice. He became the ransom to evil. And basically the best like picture illustration is again the book by C.S. Lewis, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, in which Aslan, who was sacrificed by I think it was like the witch sacrificed him, or like he did like what did they do? They tied him up, they light him on fire or something. It's been a long time, but I know that it was in order to cover the sins. I think it was Edmund. Edmund had betrayed his family, and for that he deserved to die. And so instead, and they were basically, he was like the servant or the slave of the witch. And Aslan said, "I will take Edmund's place. I will become basically the ultimate ransom for her sin." And so then the witch, just as like Satan did not expect Aslan to rise again, and when he did, he basically defeated death, because death is both a spiritual significance. Of course, we're spiritually dead, spiritually corruptible, and also as this physical reality in which things are going to become materially corruptible. After a time, our cells no longer reproduce; they start to deteriorate over time, and so with that deteriorating process, is kind of a metaphor for this is the way our soul is, the way our soul deteriorates. And so Christ defeating physical death is just in the same sense a metaphor, the way that he was able to defeat the implications of our spiritual death. And so again, the emphasis in this model is again Christ rising triumphantly, and by defeating death, he's able to win for us the graces necessary for salvation. And so God's wrath, of course, is upon us for all our sins, and the judgment of God is going to be levied against us for our corruptible selves. God is a just God. And so the way that God's wrath is going to be atoned for is that now that we are no longer ransomed to Satan, that now we can be sanctified through the grace of God, and we can be made perfect. And this kind of explains also why there needs to be a role for purgatory, so that we can become washed of any venial sins before we enter heaven, that we can be completely cleansed. Whereas the penal substitutionary model for atonement basically says that our sins are like a transaction. They're like a commercial fee in which all of our sins, all the sins of humanity, are basically placed onto Christ, that instead of us having to deal with the punishment of our sin, that Christ will deal with the punishment of our sin to appease the wrath of God. And that model is one that I'm not as big a fan of, because I don't think that sins are going to be transferable like cash money is. So I think the Christus Victor one has a big, and it's also the one that the Fathers of the Faith championed. So that's why I prefer that model. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you didn't. Yeah, they stabbed him. That's right. Yeah. Wasn't Arianism? Yeah, and Arianism basically. Second Impact. What's on? Second Impact. Sound like the. Anyway, I'm not sure what you mean by Second Impact. Young Hegelians Club. Yeah, so that was what Kierkegaard was writing to Svetnaz, was to the young Hegelians. Yeah, so Arianism basically denied the Trinity. It basically denied, in particular, the consubstantial nature of God and Christ. They share the same substance. If I remember correctly, let me look it up just to make sure, but I believe they said that like Christ was a man who had like godly qualities. That was like, I think, the heresy. Yeah, so he was lower than God, basically. Yeah, so Arianism is a non-Trinitarian Christological doctrine which believes that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, who was begotten by God the Father and is distinct from the Father, therefore subordinate to him, but the Son is also God, i.e., God the Son. Arian theology was attributed to Arius. The concept of Christ is based on the belief that the Son of God did not always exist, but was begotten within time by God the Father. So it seems that he's like slightly lesser than God and subordinate to him. But it seems that he is somehow also God, which seems kind of contradictory or kind of confusing given, the nature of God being immutable, eternal, and those type of things. So it makes a lot more sense that God would be consubstantial with Christ. And again, that's why I think Christianity is the most intelligible religion, is because heresies like this got pushed away. All right. So then, just talking about, some basic arguments for the resurrection. I'm not so much interested in like the historical arguments. Like I said, we're going to try to have a debate on this, but I think that if you are wanting to know more, definitely read anything written by William Lane Craig on this. I think it's Reasons to Believe. They also provide a lot of historical evidence for the resurrection. But the three main arguments, and these are arguments that have always been supplied by church fathers, is one, that the disciples were afraid after Jesus had died. They had just seen, their leader, the one that they had looked up to, the one that they admired, just be killed in the most brutal fashion possible. He was nailed to a cross. He was literally crucified. The word excruciating comes from the word meaning of the cross. It's like the most horrific death you can possibly die. So you just saw like their leader like get handed over to them like that, to the the Jews, and it was crucified by the Romans. And so then the question becomes, will they die? And so according to the gospel passages, that they were hiding in fear up in the room, and it wasn't until Jesus appeared to them that they suddenly became, after his resurrection, that they became energized, that they became invigorated and were willing to die for their faith. Most people do not. Most people fear death. Most people are wary of it, and yet they were willing to accept it straight on because they knew that their spiritual death was no longer guaranteed. They now were basically given new life because of Christ's resurrection. And this is something, again, that Athanasius talks a lot about. He talks about the fact that Christians in general now are going to be given this special ability to look beyond our natural fear of death and to know that we have eternal life in heaven. And so the fact that the disciples in particular were going to be die martyrs' deaths and were going to become very alive for Christ says that they probably saw something. Now some people have said like, oh, maybe they all just saw an illusion or something of that sort, or like they're all hallucinating. Different people have offered different explanations. There's different responses to those. Again, I'm not the one that's going to get into that debate. And this argument is, by the way, was presented as early as like 100 AD in Clement's letter to the Romans. I was reading that just the other day, and he talks a little bit about this. Athanasius directly talks about it, bringing up the disciples and their martyrdom. And so some people have also argued that, there's not a lot of historical evidence for this, but it's been in the Christian tradition and the Christian, documents for a long time. The other, one of the other, I guess you could say, historical points that people often point to is the empty tomb. And this comes from a verse in the Bible. It comes from Matthew 28:11-15. I'll just show this here. And basically it says here, while they were going, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests everything that happened, the guards being those who could watch the tomb. After the priests had assembled with the elders, they devised a plan to give a large sum of money to the soldiers, telling them, "You must say, his disciples came at night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story is still told among the Jews to this day. And so basically what they're saying is here that the Jews, who of course are going to be the enemies of Christ, the ones who had the most to gain out of showing that Christ did not resurrect from the dead, they never denied Jesus' resurrection. Or rather, they never denied the empty tomb. They never said that the tomb was not empty. Instead, they maintained that the disciples stole the body. And so if truly Jesus hadn't resurrected, someone had just been like, yo, here is the tomb where Jesus was laid. Let's go in. Okay, there's Jesus's body. Looks like you're wrong. So anyone could like fact check it if Jesus had not if the tomb was not empty. And that would have immediately deflated the entire Christian church, the entire Christian movement. It would have been probably wiped out within a few days if the tomb had not been empty. So that is one of the historical details that is kind of like considered like one of the basic ones. And so that asks the question, okay, well, what happened then? And then the final one, and that I think a lot of people like to point to, is that there was an enemy who converted, and the enemy, of course, is Paul. And in the Bible, in the book of Acts, it talks about how his name was originally Saul. He was one of the Jews. He was one of the chief, I think he was one of the chief elders, or he was one of, and definitely involved in the Jewish intellectual community. He was one of like their Pharisees or chief priests or something of that. He definitely had high status, and I think he was one of the Pharisees, which is one of like the Jewish religious leaders. And his task was to find Christians and to basically turn them over to the Romans for persecution, to be arrested, because they were considered they were like stirring up trouble, heresies, either agitators to the Jewish hegemony in Israel. And so that's why it was the job of Saul to do something like that. And on his way to Damascus, he was blinded by a great light. And according to the book of Acts, Saul said that he witnessed Jesus, the resurrected Christ, appear to him. And he said that you were no longer Saul, you were now Paul, and that you were now to go on and spread the ministry of Christ. And after that, he became the most invigorated member of the church. In definitely the days of the earlier church, probably so as much so as like Saint Peter. He's often considered like he's one of the most powerful bishops to the Gentiles. He was spreading churches, creating new churches. You can look at like Paul's missionary journeys. He went all over the Mediterranean. Paul was the one who wrote most of the epistles in the New Testament. Almost all of those are attributed to Paul. So we can see that he was very much inspired and definitely motivated. He ended up dying. He was a martyr's death as well. He was beheaded because he had a Roman citizenship, so he was not going to be crucified. Instead, he was beheaded at the end of his life. Or after, I think he was under like house arrest for like several years, and then he was finally beheaded. And so basically we have here is an example of someone who's the enemy of the church, and now he becomes probably one of the biggest champions, one of the biggest advocates, apologists for the church. And so this absolute reversal shows that he probably saw something. So the tomb is empty. The disciples seem to saw something. Paul seemed to saw something. And so this is good evidence for the resurrection of Christ, just from a historical point of view. I already kind of gave the philosophical. I know Rem wasn't, you missed it, but gave the philosophical argument for why I think the resurrection makes conceptual sense as well. Other arguments include for the resurrection or for the truth of Christianity, include the explosion of the early church and the eventual hegemony of Christianity over all pagan religions, the Roman ones and the European ones, even despite the heavy persecution in its initial stages. In fact, the Roman Emperor Nero, he was one of he persecuted Christians to some of the most harshest degrees. After the Rome burned down, there was great Roman fire. He blamed it on the Christians, and this led to mass persecutions, and to the fact that the church survived, but not just survived, but it actually thrived and was able to take over. But unlike Islam, which basically was able to take over through force and war and domination, Christianity took over through mainly peaceful means, through just converting Constantine and other governmental. What was the other ones? The Merovingians of France, and the Carolingians, who were later Charlemagne was one of that dynasty. So again, through process of conversion, they were able to take over most of Europe, which is very unique. And so basically, the Colosseum, that they used to throw Christians in there. They had lions that would basically battle with the Christians, and of course the Christians would just basically be gruesomely devoured. And that was a spectator sport for Romans during the time. So again, basically what I'm trying to get at is there was less persecution, and yet the church was able to blossom. And I guess you could say that this kind of points back to this biblical passage that says, a good tree cannot, and this is from Matthew 17:18, A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. And that's kind of the concept going on here. The fruits of Christianity were very impressive and unexpected, and so it seems to show that there's something deeper, spiritually speaking, going on. All right. So then here's another passage from, I'm just going to read it from St. Athanasius on the Incarnation, and it's about basically that concept I was talking about, particularly on the existence of pagan gods. And it says basically here, any word then those who disbelieve in the resurrection have no support in facts, if their gods and evil spirits do not drive away the supposedly dead Christ. Rather, it is he who convicts them of being dead. We are agreed that a dead person can do nothing, yet the Savior works mightily every day, drawing men to religion, persuading them to virtue, teaching them about immorality, quickening their thirst for heavenly things, revealing the knowledge of the Father, inspiring strength in face of death, manifesting himself to each and displacing the irreligion of idols, while the gods and the evil spirits of the unbelievers can do none of these things, but rather become dead at Christ's presence. All their ostentation, barren and void, by the sign of the cross. On the contrary, all magic is stayed, all sorcery confounded, all the idols are abandoned and deserted, and all senseless pleasure ceases, as the eye of faith looks up from from earth to heaven. Whom then are we to call dead? Shall we call Christ dead, who effects all this? But the dead have not the faculty to effect anything. Or shall we call death dead, which effects nothing whatever, but lies as lifeless and ineffective as are the evil spirits and the idols? The Son of God, living and effective, is active every day and effects the salvation of all. But death is daily proved to be stripped of all its strength, and it is the idols and the evil spirits who are dead, not he. I love that line there. Let me read that again. That's such a great line. Death is daily proved to be stripped of all its strength, and it is the idols and the evil spirits who are dead, not he. They are the ones, these pagan gods who have been defeated. No room for doubt remains, therefore, concerning the resurrection of his body. That's a short passage from, again, St. Athanasius on the Incarnation. It's a great book. Definitely recommend it. And so with that, I now concluded kind of why I think that Christianity has the superior intellectual and historical position. I went a little bit over time, so forgive me for that. I will now open up the Q&A. While I look for that passage, I told you I was looking for that passage. I want to find it. It's really bothering me. I can't find it. But if you have any questions, let me know. I see that Spetnaz Groiper is clapping. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. I'll take you back to East Atlanta. What? I'm kind of confused. Why are you guys singing Havana? What? Thanks for the ice cream, Spetnaz. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's all good, big guy. Yeah, you missed the far on Karkankar. That's okay. He's fun. He's a fun guy though. I gotta find this faster. This is like I found it, and then for some reason I lost it. I can't believe that. This is bothering me so much. Oh, here it is. I just opened right up to it. Okay. Here we go. I'm just gonna read this straight off. I must have missed a page or something here. Kierkegaard writes, "Your subsequent assertions are no more helpful. You say a direct revelation from God that we will receive this help is unnecessary because, quote, there is no other way." This is what Kant said. But we can conceive the decrees of a righteous lawgiver with regard to frail but morally striving creatures like ourselves. But this merely restates your position. It is no reply to the objection that even when we have good reason to, quote, expect everything by the grace of a superior, we cannot assume that we must get it as a matter of course. I think that the objector is trying to say there that we would be morally presumptuous to interpret our need as somehow creating a requirement for God to meet it. Such presumptuousness is deeply contradictory to the humility that should characterize those who have come to recognize their sinfulness. again, we are greatly deprived, and so expecting that God will just give us this grace is going to be presumptuous. Is going to be contrary to the mental state that we ought to, exhibit, the one that we are going to exhibit given our pessimistic outlook. But if we have no right to presume that God will aid us, we return to the question of how those who are mired in sin, can gain the reasonable confidence they need to renew their striving. Again, there needs to be some source of renewal, some source of confidence that we can look to, and of course is provided through revelation. Revelation can provide this by offering some evidence, not certain evidence, but enough to justify confidence that God has committed himself to our redemption. And that's exactly where I stand there. Of course, this will never be certain, but it is certainly going to be satisfactory. It is going to be and give us enough evidence to justify our confidence, and God has committed himself to our redemption. So hopefully that was interesting, intriguing, learned something new. That is the end of my slideshow there. I will pull up like some music here. I might end the YouTube video, so we'll see what type of questions you guys got. But why didn't America convert Iraq and Afghanistan? That's a great question. So I'll probably just end the YouTube video here. Thanks guys for watching. The YouTube, appreciate it. Signing out there.